Here in this hell, this garden, this zoo, this zoological garden with swans as the target everyone is looking at, two cheetahs lie in each other's arms. Hey there humans, my name is Magrathea, and today on my reading list we are going to be talking about The Garden, New and Selected Poetry and Prose by Bella Akhmadulina. Translation copyright 1990 by F.D. Reeve. So that's our translator, F.D. Reeve. And she was considered one of the finest is the word that they use on the inside flap, poets of the Soviet Union. And it's nice to see her work in translation. I was talking with some friends of mine who write Yuri on Ice fan fiction, and I couldn't think of a single female Russian poet off the top of my head. I could think of several male Russian poets and male novelists from Russia throughout history, primarily the 19th century, because, you know, that's the hot zone for a lot of the Russian literature that we're exposed to here in the United States is the 19th century. But yeah, I couldn't name a single female writer from Russia off the top of my head, and so I went and I did some digging, and then thanks to my digging, one of my friends included a poem by this author in their fic, and that made me feel special. I like reading poetry in translation because sometimes, like, the conventions of poetry don't translate easily. When you write a poem, you're conscientious of not just the words that you're putting on page in terms of how they tell a story, but in terms of how they sound and how they feel next to each other. You're paying attention to end rhymes, internal rhymes, the meter of each word, like the way that the syllables are emphasized in what order, and all of those aspects of poetry are part of what make poems poems, you know? They create the sound and the feeling and the atmosphere of poetry, and they don't translate very well. Even if you can't read the original, if you feel something interesting or unique or odd or uncomfortable or like super cool, anything at all in the translation, you can look at the original and kind of see how it looked. And like the visual aspect of writing poetry is also a part of the poem. And I think all of those things together make translating poetry incredibly difficult. So props to you, F.D. Reeve, for translating poetry. I enjoyed this book in terms of its themes. In poems like Two Cheetahs, you can see that very clearly. Everyone has come to look at the swans at this zoo, which, I mean, swans are nasty. They're mean. But people don't expect them to be. And so everyone's there to look at the swans, and I'm not distracted at all by the fact that somebody I knew was once attacked by a swan. But people are there to look at swans, and they're ignoring the cheetahs, who are just as ferocious as swans, if not more. You know, we assume that they're more. But they're just two cheetahs lying there together, and they couldn't be bothered by whether or not the world is paying attention to them. But they're still there in this zoo. So there's just this kind of like tension between wanting to belong and never really being able to that runs through very many of these poems. There's one poem in here, I think it was called The Rain. I'm gonna double check that. It was called A Fairy Tale About the Rain, and it's on page 41. I really liked this poem. It's a long poem. It's got sections. It's got like several sections. It's got 13 sections. Some of them are very short. Others are like up to about a page and a half long. This poem, A Fairy Tale About the Rain, the speaker of the poem has a personal rain cloud that is like pouring down on her, and it's really frustrating, and she hates it. She hates always being cold and always being wet. But this rain cloud is like attached to her. It's got like a personality. It's like a sad puppy, this rain cloud, and it follows her around and it loves her. She gets invited to go to this fancy party inside a house, and she knows she can't take a rain cloud inside a house. And so she and the rain cloud have to do some reckoning. And I really like this poem. I like the way that the rain cloud is characterized as being, you know, basically a fluffy dog that's just sad and so attached to the speaker. I like the way that the speaker for most of the poem is so concerned about what others are thinking of her, what others are viewing when they see this constantly drenched woman. And I really like the way that the speaker of the poem and the rain cloud are able to, you know, come to terms with each other at the end. I'm not gonna spoil it, but it's a very satisfying story, and it's a very satisfying poem. I think that it's important to read books from other countries, especially ones that we don't necessarily have a lot in common with. It's important to read actual literature by actual authors from other countries so that we can understand that people are people. A very important message that I got from reading this book, because, you know, again, I could not have named a single Russian female author before I found this person, before I found this book. But now that I've read this book, now that I've read her poetry and the 3 prose pieces at the end, I feel like I have a deeper understanding of what it's like to be a woman in Russia, what it's like to be a poet in Russia, or at least a female poet during the Soviet Union. And, you know, the female poets during the Soviet Union are the ones who have mothered this generation of Russian activists and Russian people. And, you know, go Pussy Riot.